She knocked on those papers like I was already wasting her time. Sign it, Piper. What do you think happens to this house after you're gone anyway? I said nothing. I just slid the papers back across the table. That night, sitting on the laundry room floor, I found something in that paperwork that changed everything, and she had no idea it existed. My name is Piper Roberts. I'm 69 years old, and I've lived just outside Franklin, Tennessee in the same farmhouse my husband Walter and I bought nearly 40 years ago. These days, the house is quiet again. The garden is coming back. Some mornings I sit on the porch with my coffee and I can actually hear the birds. But that wasn't true a year ago. Ryan and Taylor had moved in 8 months before that dinner. Their restaurant in Nashville had failed. Fast, bad, the kind of failure that leaves paper trails and phone calls you stop answering. They said 6 months, just until they got back on their feet. I believed them because mothers tend to believe their children are still the people they used to be. At first, it felt like family. Extra towels in the bathroom, more noise in the kitchen, shoes by the back door. Then one afternoon, I came home and couldn't find my measuring cups. Taylor had reorganized the cabinets, didn't mention it, just moved everything. I stood in my own kitchen opening drawers like a stranger, and I thought, when did I stop being allowed to know where things are in my own house? I overheard her on the phone in the driveway one evening, calling the farmhouse a future investment property. She didn't know I was standing near the window, so by the time that dinner happened, something had already been building for months. What I still didn't know was how far it had already gone. Taylor pushed the papers closer to me across the table and said refinancings would help everyone breathe easier. She said it the way people talk to someone who's being difficult for no reason. Ryan nodded along without looking at me. I turned the pages slowly, and most of the numbers didn't mean much to me at first. But one thing did catch my eye. The lender name wasn't local. Neither was the mailing address. I asked why paperwork connected to my home was going through a company in another state. Taylor's smile got tighter almost immediately. She took a long sip of bourbon before she said anything. Then she leaned back and asked me, and I want you to hear this exactly how she said it. She asked me what I thought was going to happen to the property after I was gone anyway. That sentence just settled over the table like smoke. I told him I wasn't signing anything that night. Ryan finally spoke, quiet, tired, like I was the one making things hard. He said, "Mom, please, we're trying to help all of us here, all of us." Funny how fast people start saying, all of us, when they mean your money, your house, your life. I slid the papers back across the table and said, I wanted a lawyer to look at them first. That's when Taylor's chair scraped back against the floor. The sound startled me more than her voice. She reached for her bourbon too fast and the glass tipped. I still don't know if she threw it or just lost control of it. And it struck the corner of the cabinet beside the table with a hard crack. Then came another sound, softer. Worse, Walter's pocket watch hit the tile floor. The watch had belonged to Walter's father before it was Walter's. My husband carried it every Sunday for almost 30 years. After he died, I kept it on the shelf beside the dining room cabinet because seeing it there made the house feel less empty. Some things you keep not because they're useful, but because they hold a person's shape. I bent down slowly and picked it up. My knees hurt on that tile. They always do now. It's just part of getting older. The glass face had cracked straight down the center. One of the hands was bent backward. Taylor muttered something about accidents. Ryan said nothing. That silence hurt worse than the broken watch. Do you think he knew, even then, how much that silence would cost him later? Neither one of them apologized before the bedroom door shut that night. By 11:30, the house was quiet, except for the dryer humming in the laundry room. I sat on the tile floor in my socks, Walter's watch in one hand, the refinance envelope in the other. The peach cobbler from church was still sitting on the counter untouched. The vanilla ice cream beside it had melted into soup while we were in that dining room. I opened the paperwork again under the laundry room light, and near the bottom corner of one page, I found initials. They looked enough like mine to fool someone glancing quickly, but they weren't mine. I traced the pen marks with my thumb 3 times before I let myself think the thought clearly. Somebody had been practicing my signature. Upstairs, I could hear Taylor laughing at something on television. Ryan laughed too, softly, like none of this had happened. The next morning, before either of them woke up, I went to the junk drawer and found the key to Walter's storage unit. I hadn't touched that unit in 11 years. The roads outside Franklin looked washed out that morning. Pale sky, thin fog still sitting low over the fields, empty gas stations. I had weak burnt coffee in a travel mug on the seat beside me, the kind that tastes the same no matter how much cream you add. At every red light, I almost turned around, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because grief has a way of making you feel like unopened doors are safer left closed. The storage manager still recognized me, older now, thinner. He gave me this small, sad smile when I signed in and said he was surprised I'd kept the unit all this time. Honestly, so was I. When I rolled the metal door open, dust moved through the light in slow, quiet streaks. Walter's fishing poles were leaning against the wall, Christmas boxes, gardening tools, file containers in his careful handwriting, taxes, seed orders, insurance, shop receipts. I spent almost an hour on that concrete floor, knees aching, going through everything. And near the bottom of a box, tucked under an old ledger, I found a dark blue folder with one label, Family Trust. I sat cross-legged right there on the floor while 18-wheelers rumbled past on the highway outside. Inside were property records, notarized documents, and a handwritten letter from Walter dated 15 years earlier. He wrote that he'd set up the trust after watching his older brother lose inherited land because his kids used it to cover business debt. He said property built across generations shouldn't disappear because somebody panicked, and then I read the sentence that made me stop breathing for just a moment. The farmhouse could not legally be refinanced, sold, or transferred without trustee approval while I was still alive and living there. He had even underlined it. In blue ink, I sat there staring at his handwriting until my eyes blurred. Walter had been protecting me from something he hoped would never happen. And here we were. What would you have felt in that moment? Relief or something closer to grief? That afternoon, I drove to Daniel Pierce's office downtown. Daniel had handled Walter's estate years ago, still had the same brown reading glasses sliding halfway down his nose. He reviewed the refinance packet quietly while rain tapped against the window. After about 15 minutes, he leaned back and asked if I recognized all the initials on the paperwork. I told him no. He nodded once like he already knew. He said the refinance would likely fail under the trust structure anyway, but the forged initials were a different matter. Not enough for drama, not enough to call the police over yet. Just enough, he said quietly, to tell to me that someone in my own house had started treating my consent like an inconvenience. That landed harder than I expected. The next morning, I went to the county records office. Maria Delgado was at the counter. We used to volunteer together at church bake sales years ago. She hugged me the moment she saw my face. I didn't have to explain much. Women who've lived long enough can read exhaustion the same way. Younger people read a text message. Maria quietly checked the filing history on the farmhouse. About 20 minutes later, she lowered her voice and told me a refinance submission had already been attempted. Weeks earlier, rejected. Signature mismatch. I felt strangely calm hearing it out loud, like part of me had already accepted it before anyone confirmed it. After that, I stopped trying to keep peace at my own expense. Not in some dramatic way. I just stopped. I copied the trust documents and stored them somewhere separate, moved some savings to a different account, updated my medical paperwork, stopped apologizing every time I wanted quiet in my own kitchen. Ryan noticed. One evening, he found me at the dining table with papers spread out and asked if I was angry with him. He looked exhausted, older than 42. There were shadows under his eyes I hadn't seen before. He sat down and, for the first time, told me how bad things actually were. The Nashville business had collapsed faster than he'd let on. Supplier debts, business loans, medical bills from Taylor's surgery 2 years back. Every month they fell further behind. He rubbed his palms against his jeans while he talked and finally said that moving back into his childhood home made him feel like a failure every single day. That after Walter died, he never quite figured out how to become the kind of man his father had been. I felt sorry for him. I did. But sorrow and trust, those aren't the same thing. 3 days later, I arranged for everyone to stay after Walter's memorial luncheon at the church fellowship hall. Taylor smiled when I mentioned it. She thought I was finally ready to sign. The fellowship hall smelled like baked ham and old hymn books, folding tables along the walls, everybody talking in those careful church voices people use when tension is already in the room. When Daniel Pierce walked in carrying two folders, I watched Taylor's smile go flat at the edges. Maria arrived a minute later, with a county records envelope pressed against her chest. Nobody raised their voice that afternoon. Nobody needed to. Daniel laid out the trust documents. Maria placed the rejected filing record on the table. The room got very quiet very fast. Taylor asked why I was humiliating them like this. Oh, that question. That one almost broke something in me, because for months I had been asking, quietly, daily, for just basic decency inside my own home, and somehow I was still the one being accused of cruelty for finally protecting myself. I told Ryan clearly I was not cutting him out of my life, but I was done financing guilt and dishonesty dressed up as family obligation. He stared at the floor the entire time I spoke. 6 weeks later, they moved to a rental townhouse near Murfreesboro. Ryan found overnight warehouse work. Taylor stayed angry at everyone except herself. I didn't send money. That was new for me. By October, I reopened the greenhouse, not as a business, just as a place. A few women from church started coming by on Thursdays. Widows, women caring for sick husbands, women figuring out how to live alone after 40 years beside someone. We planted lavender and rosemary and talked about grandchildren and sleep problems and grief and recipes that never turn out right the first time. Healing doesn't always arrive the way you expect it to. Sometimes it just sounds like older women laughing over dirt. One cold morning in November, Ryan showed up on the porch with coffee from the diner on Highway 31. We sat at the kitchen table and talked, really talked, for the first time in years. He admitted he'd stopped feeling like himself a long time ago. I admitted I'd spent too many years confusing love with endless tolerance. Before he left, he noticed Walter's watch sitting on the windowsill. I'd repaired the mechanism, but I'd kept the cracked glass exactly the way it was. He touched the edge of it carefully and asked why I never replaced it. I told him some things heal better when you stop pretending they were never broken. After he left, I stood at the sink, watching the greenhouse lights glow softly through the backyard dark. The house felt warm, not fixed, not perfect, just honest. And at 69, I'll take honest over perfect any day of the week. What I know now that I didn't know then, dignity doesn't have to be loud. And protecting yourself isn't the same as turning your back on the people you love. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long to believe I was allowed to know the difference. If this story brought up something for you, maybe a time someone in your own family crossed a line you weren't sure you were allowed to defend, I'd really like to hear about it in the comments. And if you're watching this, wondering whether Piper ever fully got Ryan back, stick around. That part of the story is still being written.